For a while, I had no idea what I liked to read, and I couldn't figure out if this was a matter of taste or an identity crisis, and I've come to the conclusion that it was both, and that's exactly why I was so miserable. I really started to notice this issue around the time I was 19 and 20. I was starting to venture out of YA and kind of dip my feet into the pools of adult fiction. I was always a bit scared of adult fiction because when I was growing up online, there was this massive debate about the overrepresentation of YA in online book communities. Arguing about books did not begin with book talk. We have been fighting and squabbling with each other for eons and eras, and we will ever continue to do so. One of the major debates was about how everyone online seemed to only be talking about young adult fiction, and the debate, like from my recollection of it, this was like 10 years ago and I was like age 13. There would always be people who would be like, how come the book community only ever talks about YA? And then people in the book community would be like, well, it's the internet. You can always just search up for content about adult books, or if you would like, you can make content about adult books, you know, make the content you want to see, write the thing you want to read, that kind of thing. We really seem to have moved on from that debate. Have we moved up? Questionable, but we have moved on. But I don't think the fact that we don't have this debate anymore comes from the fact that we've shifted our focus onto other debates. I think it comes from the fact that now there is this gray area that really came to being with the surge in popularity in new adult fiction in the early 2020s. We have books like The Song of Achilles, Normal People, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, Emily Henry's novels. These are books that are all dominating online discussion, and none of them are really YA. They really seem to occupy this gray area where they follow adults, they follow adult issues, but they're appealing to people who are younger adults in their, I would say, older teens and early 20s. And I feel like in the early 2020s, we really have had a rise in fiction about people in their early 20s. Maybe we're just like playing with the decade, I don't know. Maybe in 2080 we'll be writing all books about octogenarians, who knows. But when I was growing up as a teenager, I had this huge conception that adult fiction was uncharted territory. I mean, you go into the bookstore and you go into the adult sections and the shelves are like physically taller. Like they are imposing. They tower over you. And I was like 5'7" by the time I was 12. Like, who are you trying to intimidate? Why are those shelves so tall? What are you trying to compensate for? In, you know, absorbing all of these debates, I felt like I had no online map that I could use to navigate the adult fiction section. I felt so competent in my ability to pick out YA novels that I really like to read. Like there was once a time where I could go into a bookstore and within 5 minutes have like 3 books that I wanted to read, that I knew I would like, that I was excited about. But when it came to adult fiction, I was so at a loss. I would spend like 30 minutes and come out with maybe 1 book that I was like, this is what I like. I had no idea what to do, and instead of actually like looking in online spaces for discussions about adult fiction, my best method was to just go based off vibes. What made sense to me was I was like, okay, I'm gonna categorize this alphabetically. I'm gonna start with A, and I'm gonna go into the bookstore. I'm gonna go to the section of the shelves where all the authors' last names start with A, and I'm going to pick a book that I think I'll like, that I've never heard anything about. I won't go on Goodreads, I won't go on YouTube, I won't go on TikTok, I won't look up anything about it. I'm gonna read it and see what I think. And like, is this the new way to find your favorite book? No, it's actually a really not great way to go about reading. I honestly don't even have a lot of the books that I bought during this time of my life because I just didn't connect with any of them. And also a lot of them I think I didn't even end up reading because I picked them out on a whim. So it was so purely context and mood based of that particular moment. And like a lot of the times by the time I got home, I was just like, I don't even want to read this anymore. Like, why did I buy this? I think YA by design is something that is a little bit more accessible because it's aimed at a younger audience. It's targeted at getting younger people into reading. So it is just easier to find its entry point because even though YA is not a genre and adult is not a genre, they are age categories used to denote a certain age demographic that those books are meant to appeal to. There is a certain style and formula to YA, and that's not to knock it at all. That's not to say, oh, YA is so much less complex. I think writing a good YA book is an art form, and I love YA to the ends of the world, but it can very easily be broken down into kind of 4 genres. You have YA romance, you have paranormal YA, you have high fantasy, and then you have some historical fiction in there. Whereas I feel like adult fiction, you don't have just genres that it can be broken down into. There's different styles, there's experimental fiction, there's literary fiction, there's genre fiction, and it's wonderful because there are all of these niches that you can get into and explore and find what really hits with you and what really resonates, but getting into it is so hard. And also, I love YA. My favorite book series is still The Infernal Devices. Those books to me get down to the core of just what it means to be a human, what it means to be in love, what it means to have a friend, and I'm not even being dramatic. Like, those books never cease to make me cry and sob. I've read them like 6 times, and my most recent reread was when I was like 22, and it was actually, I think, one of my most favorite times I've had reading that book, besides like the first time I read them when I was 12, because it really resonated with me. I remember reading it and being like, oh my god, this is literature. Like, this is the point. This is why we write. This is why we read. This is beautiful. I think your favorite book is like a virus. It infects your cells and it starts rewriting the code to produce more of itself and then spread and proliferate throughout you and basically rewrites who you are in a sense. That is how I feel about a good book. It becomes part of who you are. It's not just something you love anymore. And I loved YA so much. It was such a formative part of my growing up. It was really hard to acknowledge and admit to myself that it wasn't resonating with me anymore. Because when I was 15 and 16, I declared, I was like, I'm going to read YA for the rest of my life. And I think this stemmed from the part of me that thought I would be 16 forever. And you know, when you're 16, you're wrong about a lot of the things you think you're right about. So having to admit that I was moving on from YA was also having to admit that I was wrong about something I held as such a core value and belief about myself. YA books were how I figured out who I was growing up, because I knew, I was like, I love The Infernal Devices, I love Shatter Me, and from that I can discern myself as a hopeless romantic and an idealist. You know, growing up out of that was really hard, because it wasn't just growing up and trying to find new things that I liked, it was growing up and trying to find myself, because I've always found myself through what I read. And I couldn't even consciously register the fact that I wasn't enjoying YA as much anymore. Finally, once I did start to realize, okay, maybe I'm not resonating as much with YA, maybe I should try and find some adult fiction, I took to the internet. And I think the internet and the book community online is such a helpful resource for finding books that you like to read. I don't know where I would be without it. The flip side of social media is that I think it promotes branding yourself rather than developing a personal taste. I think of branding yourself as capitalizing off of your personal taste. It's turning your personal taste into something that you can commodify and not something that is natural and just makes life more enjoyable for you by seeking out the things that bring you pleasure. And I think with the rise of social media, and especially with the rise of lifestyle influencers, there's this massive pressure to brand yourself and to figure out what you like and then to figure out how you can capitalize off of that. Whether it be monetary or social, there's this huge pressure nowadays, I feel, to create a brand around yourself, to have a personal brand rather than a personal taste, and to just do things for the sake of promoting yourself as a brand rather than to seek things out that bring you pleasure because they speak to you personally. And that has been something that has made me so depressed recently, like in the past year or so. I've really been trying to focus on just like, what do I like? Because I'm constantly bombarded with content of people selling me things that I don't even know if they like. It just matches their brand. So when I decided to try and find books that I liked, I decided to go the route of branding myself. And this was at a time of particularly low self-esteem. I haven't mentioned this, but during this time when I had no idea what I liked to read, I was also going through possibly the worst depressive episode of my entire life. It lasted like 2.5 years. I think a big part of it was because I wasn't reading, but also it's hard to say because lack of enjoyment in the things you once loved is like a hallmark of a depressive episode, so who knows. All I identified with was that I was incurably sad. Now I know that is so wrong and that is not the case at all, but at the time I was like, this is just who I am. So when I was seeking out what I wanted to read, I was also seeking out an identity and like a personal brand. So I typed into the YouTube search bar books for weird girls. I had heard of like a few of the weird girl lit books, but I didn't actually know that it was like a genre and a thing until I searched this up, and I found a whole ton of books like Big Swiss and My Year of Rest and Relaxation, which have come to be canonical works in the weird girl lit universe. And then I got those and I read them, and don't get me wrong, like I liked those books, but I think I liked how I felt reading them more than I actually liked the books themselves. I liked that they gave me an identity that I could cling on to, because I wanted to be the weird hot girl who had niche taste in books. Isn't that who we all want to be? Like, I think the book that most encapsulates this is Cleopatra and Frankenstein. I remember reading that book. I remember having a really fun time reading that book. I remember it being an enjoyable reading experience. But what I liked even more was how I felt reading it. I loved, because like, let me show you the cover. Hold on. It's right behind me. As you can see, it's in the background of my videos, so I'm still holding on to some of this. I loved this cover. I thought this is the coolest cover ever. And this especially was what I was drawn to, was these stylized covers. You know the ones I'm talking about, where there's like a classic painting and then there's like a neon sans serif font. This one's not quite neon. This is what I wanted my brand to be. Like, look at these. Look at these. This is who I wanted to be associated with. That was like the vibe I was trying to give off. So I was trying to seek out books that gave off that vibe. I thought like this book looked so cool, and I remember thinking like, if people see me reading this book, they will think I am cool by proxy. What? And it's like, that's kind of an embarrassing thought. But I loved whipping this book out on the subway. I loved pulling this book out in front of a hot guy. So here's me admitting to you all basically that I was a performative reader. I hate to start a sentence like this. It's gonna ick me out so much. I was no better than a man. I hate to admit it. I was no better than a man with like a New Yorker tote bag and a matcha and what's the performative male read here? I have to think. I thought if I could read enough of these weird, cool, hot girl books, then I would become a weird, cool, hot girl. And I thought that if I could read enough of these books to the point that I actually liked them, then I could become someone that I liked. There was never any question of like, what is my personal taste in books? What do I like to read? It was all just like, how can I brand myself as a reader and as a person and as a girl? At the height of my like performative reading, I remember I would go to the park. It's so performative looking back on it. I still do it sometimes though, because it's fun sometimes to perform, not when it takes over your whole life. I used to go to the park and I would get an oat milk latte, of course, and then I would bring like a Jeffrey Eugenides book, which I actually did really like, but that's besides the point. I would bring like a Jeffrey Eugenides book, sit, read it, and then I would go to an indie bookstore, and I remember I bought a book of literary criticism by Roland Barthes. Have I read that book? Not in its entirety. I made it through like 20 pages before realizing, I was like, what am I doing? Why am I reading French criticism for fun? I'm not that person. But I wanted people to see me as that person. Like, I wanted people to see me as, oh, that's the girl reading Derrida in the park. And while, don't get me wrong, I think those theorists have some really interesting ideas that help me better understand literature and life. Do I read them for fun? Is it intellectually stimulating? Yes. Is it fun? Fuck no. I always had this dream that like I would be sitting reading Derrida in the park or whatever, and some guy would come up to me and like we'd fall in love. Looking back on it, I don't want to attract to the type of men who would see me reading Derrida and be like, her. That's scary. So there's that. I felt like I had no identity. My personal taste was just almost completely relegated to being out of the question. It didn't matter what I liked. I wasn't looking for books that I would enjoy reading. I was looking for books that I would enjoy having other people see me reading. And that's problematic. And I think this realization that I was doing this happened more implicitly and unconsciously than like consciously. I've just really found a way to articulate it now and in the past year. But once I realized it, I cut that shit out. I said, fuck, life is too short to be doing that. That is ridiculous behavior, let alone my personal taste. Like, it was so destructive to my mental well-being because it got to the point where I was performing when there was no audience, because who cared? Nobody. And then there's also the fact that it became so internalized because nobody was noticing. I was just internalizing the idea of others' perceptions of me because it actually wasn't a thing, like it wasn't a phenomenon that was existing. Nobody was watching what I was reading. So it became this whole internalized thing of I would be reading a book and I would be thinking about like, okay, how are other people seeing me read this book? Instead of just fucking reading a book because I liked it. And it's just so annoying to me that it got to that point and that I wasted so much time because as the saying goes, so many books, so little time. Don't waste it reading stuff you don't like just for the sake of the approval of others. And so I think this whole performance of reading and denying myself of my own personal reading taste was also just a way for me to cope with my fear of genuine authenticity and of actually discovering who I was in fear that I might not like it. You discover who you are through books. I think you also create who you are through what you read. And I think there's something so personal about the books that we love. I now get so scared when someone, I don't know why, because I do this to everybody. It's my first question in small talk. It's like, oh, what's your favorite book? When people turn that question back around on me, they're like, oh, what's your favorite book? I'm like, oh, because I feel like they might as well be asking me for my life story. And there's this idea that like, oh, if they pick up that book, they could go and read and find out everything about me. And I know that's not the case because when people are reading a book, they're thinking about its impact on them. And I really need to stop being so self-centered because like nobody's thinking about me this much. I'm like, oh my God, everybody can discern anything that they want to about me from like reading my favorite book. And I think another thing denying myself of a personal taste in books has to do with is the fact that we are so terrified of authentic 100% enthusiastic enjoyment of something. It is never seen as cool to love something wholeheartedly, and that is, I think, one of the greatest tragedies of life because I think so many people deny themselves of what they love because it's not seen as cool just to love something so wholeheartedly. But that's why we're here. And I think back to when I was reading The Infernal Devices at age 12. Was I the coolest person on the schoolyard when I was rambling on for 5 of the 6 hours of the day about how much I loved Will Herondale and about how much this love triangle was genuinely the best thing I've ever read and nothing will ever come close to it? No. But I had so much fucking fun. Like, I was so happy at that time in my life. It was one of the happiest times of my life. Like, people ask me what my favorite age has been so far, and I say 12. And I feel like that's kind of a wild answer. It's whack, like 12? Really? But it's 12 because I read The Infernal Devices at that age, and I found something that I really loved. So that brings me to where I am now. I feel like I've been on a real good kick recently with my books. Like I've been reading stuff that I've really been enjoying, and I've tried not to let what other people think of me get in the way. So I'm really trying not to care what other people think about what I'm reading and just have some fun and just read what I like, and also to not really have like a personal reading taste because I don't want to fall into the trap of branding myself as a particular kind of reader because that's not why I read. I read to expand my horizons beyond myself. I read to experience things that I can't experience. I read to learn. I read to broaden my knowledge on things. That's the same as learning. But I read to do so many things beyond just to categorize myself and to make myself look cooler. Definitely there are things I gravitate towards because I am a person. I love sad books. That's my whole reading taste right now is I do love sad books. But recently I've been like, I want to read more fun shit. Like I don't want to just read sad stuff all the time. I love to cry, but I've been having a really good time reading fun books recently. So I don't want to pigeonhole myself as the girl who only reads sad books. Even though I did just make my YouTube username Melancholic Girl Reads. My main goal now is to read diversely and to read everything, to read literary fiction, to read genre fiction, to read books written in translation, because I want to read everything and I want to read as much as possible as I can before I die. So yeah, I don't really think I want to have a reading taste. I want to devour literature. And that brings me to the end of this video. Thank you guys so much for watching me ramble. I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe some of it resonated with you. Maybe you're like, fuck, this girl is so self-obsessed. I'm feeling really self-obsessed actually after I admitted to all that shit about the performative reading. I didn't realize how much I think other people are thinking about me when they are probably not thinking about me at all, so I should probably just move on. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you very soon in my next one. Bye!